And welcome back to the live studio. We're delighted to bring you a very special session now. We're joined by some of our PRI board members to answer your questions and talk a bit about why they've joined the PRI board. You can submit your questions using Slido. Just make sure to select Live Studio, and you can find Slido on the right-hand side of your screen. So let's kick off by introducing our PRI board members that we have with us today. So we have Conor Kehoe, Chair of the PRI board, Eric Usher, Head of UNEP Finance Initiative, Rebeca Miguela, Founder and CEO of Clarity AI, and finally Sharon Hendricks, Board Member for CalSTRS. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're all super busy, so we appreciate you taking the time. Conor, we're going to start with you with our first question. What motivated you to become a PRI board member?
You're starting with, I'm the youngest on the board. But anyway, I'll tell you in terms of tenure. But what motivated me was I've been observing what investors have done over the last 20 years. And they really have been in the vanguard of promoting sustainability. And the rest of us in the corporate world, which is the world I'm more familiar with, followed. So I just wanted to understand what was going on and hoped to contribute to furthering it.
Brilliant. I love it. Thank you so much. Eric?
Well, you know, when the PRI was established, it's UN supported, and the UN support came from two parts: the organization, mine, which is UNEP Finance Initiative, and the UN Global Compact. And so myself and Senator Jambo are the UN representatives on the PRI board, and with that, we aim to bring in the linkages and the mandate of the PRI community to work towards helping deliver on many of the objectives laid out through the United Nations.
Fantastic. Thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, so I'm representing the service providers at the board, and I believe that the service providers have a lot of value to add to the organization, and specifically Clarity AI is a mission-driven organization and also technology and AI company. I'm very convinced that we are at an inflection point in which technology and AI can really make a difference, and even more so for sustainability and an organization like the PRI. So I thought it was an important contribution to make at the board.
Thank you so much. And finally, Sharon.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm a trustee on the California State Teachers Retirement Board. And for us in the U.S., I think we're seen as a leader on sustainable investing in the U.S. But I realized I didn't get a chance to get more of a global perspective. We're a global investor. And so for me, choosing to be on the PRI board gave me access and exposure to trustees and asset managers from around the world to kind of hear how they're thinking about some of the challenges we're dealing with at CalSTRS. So it's really been educational for me, and hopefully I've been able to contribute value to the mission for PRI.
Fantastic. And it's great to have such a range of experience and different voices in PRI on the board. So fantastic. Thank you so much. As we said, we're taking your questions live. You can submit them via Slido, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Just select Live Studio. And if you can't see Slido, you might just need to exit full screen mode. So Conor, coming back to you for our next question. What do you think is the biggest challenge or opportunity for the PRI and the wider RI community in the next few years?
Well, I'm thinking about the PRI, it's really to get it better coordinated. It's reached a size now where I think it needs more internal disciplines and coordination to put it at the service more expressly of the mission. And then the second thing I'd love to see happen is the major signatories step up and refresh their leadership. This is a wonderful instrument for changing behavior within the whole industry, the asset management and asset owner industry. So David, the CEO, and I are now talking to major asset owners about the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. What do they want of this wonderful instrument?
Fantastic, thank you. And David was with us yesterday talking about that future strategy for 24 to 27 in the studio. Eric, same to you.
Yeah, you know, going back once again in history, one of the foundational aspects of the PRI was when the original study took place, was actually termed the Freshfields Report, which looked at whether investors could take environmental, social, and governance issues into account in their decision-making practice. And what we've seen is an evolution in that time over almost 20 years from could take these issues into account to should, and to an increasing number of jurisdictions to must. And so we are seeing a lot of what the PRI community worked on together starting with the could about how do we do this? What are the common methodologies? How do we learn from each other? Largely in a voluntary fashion, because they believed it was within their fiduciary duty, in their interest for their beneficiaries to pay attention to these issues, to these factors. To the evolution today, where increasingly this is getting factored in a regulatory sense into the capital market. So I think the challenge for PRI is this community, in many ways, it's exceeded what it aimed for. So what does it do now? Does it disband? Or how do we build on the fact that the markets are increasingly mainstreaming in, integrating into these factors into how you do business? So what is the next step for the PRI community based on that development?
He said it better than I did.
Thank you so much, Eric. Rebecca?
Yeah, I would like to echo that challenge, and that's exactly the opportunity as well. Like Eris is saying, that sustainability is at an inflection point again. It comes back and forth, and we have an enormous challenge as the PRI, but we also have the opportunity with such a large organization and the main players being signatories to make a change, a meaningful change. So what is the most productive role that the PRI can take? Because there are many other organizations as well, and many other roles played by different actors, right? And not necessarily just signatory organizations. And in that regard, I believe it's important to have a very clear definition. So the challenge is to be focused on one thing and make sure that we all understand what the role is and not move in many different directions. And also in my role as a technology company, leverage technology. I don't think the PRI wants to be a technology player now, but leverage technology as much as possible to serve the signatories in the best way and in the most productive way.
Fantastic. And Sharon, finally to you.
Yeah, I agree with Rebecca's comments about the inflection point. I see that. I'm excited to have you on the board, Rebecca, because I think AI is a huge game changer. I'm in education, and we see how that's changing in just all these different arenas. And I'd love to see how PRI wants to leverage that technology as well. But I also, just as an asset owner and representing asset owner community, I think there are just a lot of challenges that asset owners are facing, as well as asset managers. And I think the PRI has an important role to play in terms of tools. And I think that common language and to really understand how to contextualize, like for a California asset owner or for an Aussie asset owner, or for, to be able to regionalize what we do at PRI to best advance sustainable investing in those particular regions. And I think that's a challenge because it's getting more complex. And I hope the PRI can be a place where it can be simplified for folks, and that we can provide tools for each asset owner and manager to kind of take the next step on sustainable investing. So lots of challenges, but I'm an optimist. So I like to focus on the opportunities, and really proud of the work that PRI is doing, and excited about the work that we have ahead.
And we'll be talking about some of those themes later, about simplifying reporting and progression pathways here in the studio as well. Fantastic. So let's go to some of our audience questions. These are open to any of you to ask, so feel free to jump in. The first question is, do you think the board composition adequately reflects the signatory base? Who wants to take that?
Well, the board composition right now is designed so that asset owners are in the lead. And when I talk to asset managers, they want that leadership. I mean, asset owners, in the sense, are at the apex of the whole system, and leadership coming from them is very important for the whole system. That being said, for practical reasons, I would love to see another asset manager on the board, simply so that we have representation in committees and so that they feel more loved within the PRI. So that's my answer. It's the leadership needs to continue, I think, in the hands of asset owners and major signatories. But there is room, in my view, for another asset manager to come on the board. So I'm hoping that the board will agree to this, and we'll put it then to the signatory base.
Fantastic. Anyone want to add to that, Sharon?
Yeah, I'll just add that I will acknowledge we've had some robust conversations about this particular issue on the board. And I think it shows the importance of having a diverse board, is that we can have, conversations about the pros and cons of that. I will say, when I first came onto the PRI board, what I learned about PRI is it was an asset owner driven initiative, and the asset owner voice has been primary throughout its inception. And I think for me, I'm excited to see so many asset managers become signatories because I think there's value for them in terms of if the posture is to really learn and grow and partner with asset owners. I think that diversity is really important. But yeah, the board's having these conversations about what's most prudent given our signatory base. I mean, it's no surprise we have over 70% of our signatories now are asset managers. And so we want to be responsive to that signatory base while still maintaining the asset owner voice and leadership. So stay tuned.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question, this is linked to actually what came up a little earlier in terms of opportunities, but the question is, what role does the board see for technology and innovation in advancing the PRI's mission and enhancing ESG data accessibility? So who wants to take
Maybe
that one?
I can
Yeah,
Rebecca's a natural for that one.
So my opinion, and this is just an opinion because we are having those discussions as the board, right, is that the PRI needs to focus on what they do best, right? So that should be the main goal of adding value to the signatories in the way in which the PRI has been doing best or has a competitive advantage. Technology and AI are very powerful tools, but they should not be a distraction. They should be a mean to an end. It cannot become the end. So as I said, I don't see the PRI becoming a technology organization or having that purpose, but they should, of course, leverage technology and AI tools as much as possible to serve the PRI signatories in the best way possible. I also believe, as I said, as a representative of the service providers, that we have a responsibility as service providers and signatories of this organization as well to help the PRI and to support the PRI in using technology, data and AI in the most efficient way possible, right? So we can contribute to the community.
Amazing, thank you so much. So the next question we have, how is the board thinking about the impact of anti-ESG and how does this impact the strategy? So this is the anti-ESG sentiment that we're seeing at the moment.
Do you want me to
Who
jump?
wants to take that?
I mean, for me, in many ways, anti-ESG is a manifestation of success. Policy is making a sufficient difference that some people who are, affected by it are now reacting quite strongly. And you see it strongly in the United States, where there are, understandably enough, people who own oil and gas and coal assets. They want to lengthen their lives the lives of these assets, because they can see themselves losing out economically. And if you look at the root of the anti-ESG movement, a lot of it has come from that source. So it's understandable. It's about people seeing a transition coming and thinking, I'm going to lose out, I'm going to push back. These happen to be well-off people with a lot of resources, but you saw the same thing in France when they put up the price of gas and you had the gilets jaunes on the street. So organizing a just transition for many different parties is going to be tricky, and the anti-ESG is a manifestation of some of those parties, the better off ones, pushing back hard. It's a manifestation of success.
Brilliant. Anyone want to add to that?
I think the only extra comment I would add is when I first became a trustee over a decade ago, I think, I got my good fiduciary training, and it was all about, your job is to mitigate risk and accentuate opportunities and do that within the context of your fiduciary duty. And so over time, as I've learned about sustainable investing, that's, CalSTRS, we've, got into that space and been very thoughtful about it. And so I get the question a lot, like, how does the anti-ESG sentiment in the U.S. affect how CalSTRS invests? And I would say it doesn't really. I think we really think about ESG issues as risks and opportunities for our fund. And I think any teacher in California sees that when they hear the board interact around these conversations is really about, we live in a place where there's flooding and there's, high housing prices and all these issues that are wrapped up in ESG that real Americans, in my case, and real Californians are suffering from. And so we see what those risks are, and we have to capitalize on opportunities to invest in like clean energy solutions. So I think it's not changing our strategy moving forward and how we're allocating more resources into our, what we call our SIS portfolio, our stewardship portfolio. But I think as a trustee, certainly we get a lot of feedback on some of the political issues around anti-ESG. And I think it's just more of a symptom, too, of what's happening in our country right now in the culture. So I think for me, I've learned good investing is looking at these risks, ESG risks. And so we're going to continue with that good practice moving forward.
One thing that I would like to add on the anti-ESG topic is that we spend a lot of time as a tech organization focused on sustainability, because other organizations, service providers, focus on many other things that is not just sustainability, but we are very sustainability focused. We definitely spend a lot of time better understanding the anti-ESG trend, and our conclusion is that outside of the politicized view of this movement, if you want to call it that way, or that backlash, the reality is that we agree, like people who might have some questions about ESG, that, by the way, most of them don't define themselves as anti-ESG or anti-sustainability. That's a very important point. Many of the people who we might believe are anti-ESG are not. So they are pro-sustainability, but they just want to face or surface the issues and the challenges of assessing sustainability, measuring it, scaling it, etc. So I think we should focus on that constructive part of the movement or the trend and try to together find the ways to address those challenges, like how do you measure scope 3 really, or how do you, like all those challenges that many people are surfacing and are maybe too quickly tagged as this is anti or this is pro, and just try to constructively address those challenges that are very real, right? So that's what I would say, outside of all the politicized part of it, right?
I think we can add to, there's two sides of the coin. One is anti-ESG and the other is anti-greenwash. And I think the reality, exactly what you're saying, is you need to have a good strategy which is in the interest of your beneficiaries. You shouldn't be doing marketing about your ESG strategy unless it's real and you're really doing it. You're going to open yourself up to greenwashing. It doesn't make sense. And vice versa, you shouldn't be doing it unless it fits properly within your duties. So I think, coming to what Conor said, we have a bit of a settling out. This is becoming mainstream. And so it's true that maybe the public announcements on new ESG developments, maybe they've calmed down a little bit, but under the hood in organizations, we're not really seeing a letting up of what's going on, because most actors are doing it because it is in the interests of their business, of their beneficiaries. And therefore, it's a little bit of just a maturation stepping up. You just have to be more clear about why you're doing it. Do you have the business fundamentals to be acting in this space? And then to be prepared for, there will always be, as Conor said, some who will challenge you, and you just need to be able to meet those challenges.
I'm struck in the answers here. They're great. In a sense, there's two things going on. One is great investors making the best possible decisions they can in the interest of their beneficiaries and taking account, as you said, of all risks. And then there's another, and that's anticipating the future, but it's not making the future. The future is for politicians to make and for political leadership to make it. So in a sense, the attacks can get a bit confused because you think they're attacking investors. No, they're not. Investors, if they're doing their job, are just anticipating the future political scenario, the social needs, the needs of consumers. It's politicians who shape.
Can I give just one
Yes.
quick
Yeah.
example?
Go ahead.
Is like, to your point, Eric, about, allocating capital. You see, I don't want to, well, I will. You see places like Texas, who I think different parts of our country in the U.S. have feelings about sustainable investing. And yet when you look at what's really happening in terms of allocating capital, I think Texas, more so than even California, is putting more money into clean energy solutions. So I think that's an example to me of, I think if we just stay in our lane of like really good investing, which looks at risk and opportunities, we're going to be in a good place. And we have all the, the lawyers and the consultants giving us a second pair of eyes. Because we're seeing that in a lot of parts of the U.S. where the politicians might be saying one thing, but when it comes to asset allocation and actually allocating capital, you're seeing, the money on the ground is actually saying something different. So
fantastic. Yeah. And it's great to have these kind of more nuanced conversations about this really important topic. Okay, we have another question. Obviously, you have a diverse signatory base and lots of signatories. So the question is, how do you reconcile the diverse signatory base and views, so their diverse views, with the PRI's policy work? It's a big question. Who wants to take it?
I'm just going to, again, give my own opinion. I think that it's a diverse organization, but there are very clear principles that all the signatories need to follow, right? And those principles unify the goals of that diverse group of signatories. So I think it's, again, making sure that we keep having an alignment on the principles and what those principles mean in terms of actions and how we move forward. That's just my own opinion.
Yeah, and I think complementing that, there's also the reality is every jurisdiction is different. And so it can't be a one size fits all. So in terms of a policy approach, a position in one market doesn't necessarily, and that PRI is convening signatories to consider that position, that doesn't mean that should be the same position for another market or another jurisdiction. It has to be, there needs to be context, basically.
Absolutely.
I think there's some work to do in that area, though, I will say. I mean, I think whoever asked that question, I think that's an area we want signatories to give us more feedback on, and in terms of the policy lens, because obviously it is different in the US, even to what's going on in Canada. So I think that we need more feedback from signatories. I think that's a growing area for us. I think the bigger question that connects to is, how does the PRI continue to be this big tent that welcomes, all these different allocators from different parts of the world, and yet because of our particular jurisdictions, how do we kind of customize those principles that Rebeca's talking about into our particular context? And that's sort of the big, the $1 million question. And I think when I think about where PRI is going, I would love our organization to help, asset owners, asset managers, and service providers do that with a little more sophistication. So I think that's a growing edge for us.
Yeah, there's a challenge. I mean, there's undoubtedly a challenge as there's more scrutiny of policy positions taken. And even though your policy position might be different in the EU than, let's say, the United States or Canada, at the same time, signatories in Canada will read the policy documents going to the EU and say, wait a minute, we're going to be judged on this because we're signatories. So it's becoming more global and more contentious. And the executive is more carefully, I think, weighing up the impact versus risks of policy positions. And that's going to be necessary. I also think that we may find ourselves switching from what has largely been a focus on disclosure, reporting, to more focus on the real economy. Because, of course, that's what's happening. Incentives are being put in place to help with the transition, as in the United States with the IRA. So it could be that policy takes another dimension on as time goes forward.
Fantastic. Conor, can I just ask you one last question quickly? Someone said, fast forward to 2030, what would you like PRI to be celebrating?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Fast forward to 2030. I mean, ESG integration in the form of having specialists who support investors, it's largely happened. It's here. There's 2,000 people here. And in corporations, I can tell you, there's probably another 2,000 helping big corporations integrate ESG. And policy to have data flowing is well established in the EU and in other parts of the world, and in California, and perhaps coming to the United States more generally as well. So a lot has been achieved. Really, this is the question we're asking asset owners right now. And what are the dimensions of the question? Well, I don't know what they're going to come up with, but I can tell you a few ideas that were discussed 20 years ago and weren't included on the agenda. One was systematic consultation of beneficiaries. That was considered. Maybe it should be reconsidered. Another was aligning investment and corporation, the whole chain, more closely with the time horizon of beneficiaries. At the time that was considered, and it was thought it's important, but not important enough. Didn't make the cut in the 6 principles. There were other things as well. Say integrating ESG into the heads of investors. Right now, it's a specialist function that supports investors. Should we be doing more to produce the tools that you described, Sharon, that actually help investors integrate it fully into their thinking? So I don't know what the answer will be, because again, I'm looking for AO leadership, asset owner leadership on this, but it might be from amongst those topics.
Fantastic. Well, what a great point to finish on. We could talk all day. It's fantastic having you all here. Conor, Eric, Rebeca, Sharon, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much for submitting your questions. We're going to be taking a short break and we'll be back live from the plenary in 5 minutes.